Hey everybody, welcome back to the To Be a Boy podcast with me, Elliot Ray, and Jodie is around somewhere. It's International Women's Day coming up on Sunday, so Jodie is out and about changing the world. She is very, very busy. So welcome to spring. I can't believe the sun is shining. I am so revived. I love the sunshine. Life just feels that bit brighter, that bit lighter. So I hope you're enjoying the sun rays and getting your vitamin D. We have some super exciting things coming up. As you know, the government's parental leave review is happening next year. So me and Jodie have only got to organise a protest, because that's what we do. We've got Push for Paternity Leave coming up around the country, in London, in Leeds, in Manchester, in Birmingham on Saturday, the 18th of April. We are doing a family-friendly walk to really think about how we can ask the government for better paternity leave. It is ridiculous. 2 weeks is not enough. Paid at £187 per week. 2 out of 5 dads take no paternity leave at all. So Push for Paternity Leave is getting us all out. It's family friendly. We're going to have our placards, our t-shirts, our prams, walking through our town centres and really saying, look, Labour government, you need to do better. And we are here demanding that you do. So go to pushforpaternityleave.com and you can find out all the information about how you can join. You don't have to have a pram and a baby to join. You just need to be a human being. And of course, we can't talk about parental leave without talking about wider childcare support for parents. We are so pleased. This episode is sponsored by Koru Kids, the UK's leading after-school nanny marketplace. Find out more at korukids.co.uk. Now, there's been a massive conversation in the UK about whether we should ban social media for under 16s. Next week, we're delving into all of this. We have 2 experts, one that agrees with the ban, one that disagrees with the ban, and we've got them into the boxing ring, gave them their gloves, and they're debating what we should do about this. As you all know, Australia have introduced the ban, and many countries in Europe are thinking about doing the same thing too. So what are we doing here in the UK? To prepare for that conversation next week, we thought it was a great opportunity to re-release the amazing episode with Josh Sargent. Now, Josh, when he first came on, when we first recorded with him, he was a 14-year-old boy. And he speaks so amazingly, so articulately. It's incredible. And we thought it was an amazing time to re-release that conversation. Let's hear his opinions about how we keep children safe, how we regulate social media, how we raise healthy, passionate, caring, loving boys and girls. I think it's important framing for what we're doing around the social media ban. As always, get in touch with us, tobeaboyteam@gmail.com. We want to hear your views, your questions, your opinions. Send it all to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Hello and welcome back to Be a Boy with me, Jolie Brearley.
And me, Elliot Ray.
Today's guest is very exciting because we've done a lot of talking on this podcast about teenage boys, their struggles, their mental health, and the rising influence of online masculinity culture. But to our shame, we haven't actually spoken to any teenage boys as yet. So that changes today. Our guest is Josh Sargent, a 15-year-old secondary school student who is already doing something pretty remarkable. He's writing a book about the impact of red pill masculinity and online hustle culture on young men. Josh says he was once drawn into this world himself, influenced by online gurus, but over time began to question what he was hearing and seeing. Now, with some distance, he's speaking out about how damaging these messages can be. Josh, a very warm welcome to Be a Boy.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to speak to you. Thank you very much for coming on. Let's just kick off with you. We want to know all about you. You're 15, as I've said. You're currently, you're the year before your GCSEs. You're active on LinkedIn. You're now writing a book. You know, my first question has to be, do you want to be any more of an overachiever?
And I've got a question. Can you mentor me, please? Because clearly you're doing something right. If you have space in your diary.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for that introduction. I guess the first thing I'd say is after coming out of this world and, you know, seeing all of this these things in the media and having a realization now of some of the things that are really going on and how young men are really being exploited. All of this is really just coming out of a, number one, an anger, and number two, a desperation for the real issues behind this and what is really going on to be realized. So I think, in the past few months, there's definitely been a lot more discussion around this and the impact of the manosphere and things like that, which is great. However, I think a lot of the emphasis and issues surrounding young men and the red pill culture has been on the misogyny and how the misogyny and the attitude towards women, like projected in these communities, affects women and girls, which of course is definitely an important element of it, and it's another issue that needs addressing, right? But the problem with that is if there's too much of an emphasis on that, we don't really take a step back and think, okay, yeah, but there are still young men and boys being exploited here. And because as a society, I think we've taken, for the past 30, 40 years, and rightfully so, we've taken a mindset of feminism and we've tried to strive for equality in those areas. And, that of course is great, but I'm becoming severely worried that there's an attitude now that speaking out and working against the issues young men are facing is at the detriment of women and girls. And, I think that idea is becoming very prevalent, and I've seen it a lot on social media. And I think it just creates more division. I think we need to stop thinking that we're against each other as, two genders, and we're just a society trying to, make a world where no one's oppressed, no one's manipulated against. So, yeah, I think we need to stop this opposition and come together.
I agree with you. And I think that has been the narrative, and that narrative is affecting young people. I'm seeing it with my kids, actually. My eldest son has talked to me about sexism, and he asked me the other day if I think sexism can work the other way around and girls can be sexist to boys. And it was a really interesting conversation. And he said, but in some respects, boys aren't doing as well as girls, and boys are having a really hard time. I mean, he's 11, so he phrased it in sort of 11-year-old words, if you like. And I was like, well, that's true. Yeah, in some respects, boys really are struggling and not doing as well as girls. And in other respects, girls are not doing as well as boys and they have their problems. But we've got to stop seeing it as a boys versus girls thing and just see it as being human beings who have these challenges, and we should all be working together to fix it. But he was desperate to try and make it into that polarization, that binary that you're talking about. For me, it feels, as an old woman, I mean, I'm 46, but when I grew up, there wasn't the internet, but it feels very much to me the internet and social media does that. It puts you into boxes and it says, you're on this side, you should feel like this. You're on this side, you should feel like that. And the world is much more complicated than that.
And I think that's quite a big part of it as well. Social media companies and algorithms. I mean, I'll probably go on to speak about it, but I think the reason a lot of action wasn't taken to prevent this division and the spread of the manosphere is because they're profiting so heavily off of it.
Yeah.
And they also, the division we just spoke about, I think they reinforce it quite well through, obviously, the goal of their algorithms is to keep you on there. So they're making advertising revenue, so they're making money. And you're more likely to be on there if you feel surrounded by your own opinions. So that's where a quite interesting side of algorithmic personalization comes in and sets up these echo chambers where you're constantly surrounded by your own opinions.
Yeah, completely.
And you're taught that the other sides are completely irrelevant, and you become even more polarized to them because you never even have exposure to the other side and how they're thinking and how they're being affected.
It's horrible.
It's awful. Yeah, it's really.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's all down to profit.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, there's just some fat cats at the top of the tree making a load of money off us all tearing chunks out of each other. When I was 15, I didn't know the word misogyny. I didn't know, I was just too busy trying to see if I could buy fags from the corner shop and drink some 2020. Genuinely, I find it amazing how intelligent a lot of your generation are about this sort of stuff and have so many interesting things to say about it, because it didn't cross my mind at the age of 15 at all. We'd love to know about what it's like being in secondary school as a 15-year-old boy, what that feels like, what your experience is like in a modern day secondary school?
It's a difficult one, and I'm not going to be able to speak for my entire generation of boys of the secondary school experience, and I obviously have my experience, but I'm sure that'll probably be quite different to a lot of other boys. I think that in a way there is a lot that has definitely stayed the same, and I think it hasn't really. Well, the secondary school experience hasn't really changed as much as the media portrays. I think where the issue really lies is the online spaces, the social media, the online communities. I never really experienced exposure to the manosphere and discussions about the manosphere and reinforcement of the manosphere in person with my friends, surrounded by them. It's purely online, and the communities were made up of people that you don't know, not necessarily your in-person friends.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's definitely more prevalent online.
Do you talk about it at school? In classrooms, does stuff come from online and into the school classroom? Do you have conversations about stuff that you've seen online and masculinity influences at school? Or do you feel it's actually kept quite separate?
Yeah, so there is definitely awareness around the issue coming into it, which is brilliant. But then again, at the same time, that awareness, I think, is still, unfortunately, taking the majority of the focus onto the effects on women and girls again. So it feels like, because if you take it like a cult-like mentality, right? Imagine you're in a cult. In a cult, you're taught that the people that speak out against the cult and try and pull you out of the cult are the enemy. The manosphere and the red pill culture spends so much time trying to drill into your mind as a young man that the education system is a complete scam. That's not how you build wealth. School isn't how you build wealth. It's a waste of time. They're trying to indoctrinate you, and the word indoctrinate is 100% used. Which is ironic, really, but yeah. So there's definitely a lot of hatred instilled against the institutions, even against, parents, the government, schools. And naturally, those that are speaking in opposition to the manosphere will be part of those institutions. So they're seeing it from a mindset of, okay, the same people trying to pull me out of this are the people I'm being taught are the enemy. So they're trying to oppress me further, right? And that is why I think we need to be so careful in how we approach pulling young men out of the manosphere.
So did you find, Josh, that when you were like consuming the content online, did you just go to school and like keep it to yourself? It was something that you were doing at home. Were there not discussions at school with people who were also consuming that content? Did people gather around the same ideas, or was it very much like, that's my home life, that's something I do at home, and my school life is a completely different experience?
I wouldn't say I experienced that side of it. That's not me saying I don't think it exists. I think there will probably be areas where that does exist, and there'll be young men that, did have that area in person, where they had in-person discussions, but I didn't personally experience that side.
Did you see in schools a kickback from other kids towards education as an institution? So were they like disruptive? Are the kids at school being disruptive because they had perhaps watched these masculinity influences, absorbed what had been said to them, and so were pushing back against education as a whole, because they were being told essentially that this is an institution that you shouldn't be abiding by and listening to?
I mean, yeah, of course, you've got that rhetoric side of it that is definitely making young men feel disillusioned by the school system and the education system. But you've got the reality side of it, where in fact I think it's pretty obvious, and even outside of this manosphere view, that the education system is failing young men. The Centre of Social Justice report just a few weeks ago revealed that young men are now behind girls in every stage of the education system. I think a level of aspiration in young men has been completely lost, and that's not necessarily at the fault of the education system itself, although I think there are definitely areas that need to be changed. I think some areas of the curriculum are irrelevant and outdated. I can see how easy it would be to think, why is this relevant? This is completely useless.
Yeah.
There's that, and there's also the wider scale. Young men can easily go onto a social media feed now, turn on the news, and the world that, in a few years they're going to become an adult and move into completely on their own is one. Inflation's up, what was it, 3.5% announced yesterday? Housing market, being a first time buyer is borderline impossible. The economy's in shambles, there's global conflict everywhere. But that's not a very settling environment to be moving into. It's not very certain. And I think that's what the manosphere provides, right, is certainty. So instead of having the uncertainty of all of this conflict and economic, catastrophe and what's going to happen now when I move out and become an adult, you have that countered by the manosphere side of it, which is if you follow this program I have online, and if you start this online business with just your laptop, if you sit there and work really hard at it, it's almost guaranteed that you will become a millionaire and you will have financial freedom and you'll be loved and you'll have the woman of your dreams and you'll be in really good shape and all of these certain promises. So I don't think at the end of the day the manosphere is about boys being like innately wired to be misogynistic or to be greedy or to be immoral. It's about there's a world out there, a scary world full of uncertainty, and this online world gives young men back control and it gives them back certainty. And I probably fell into that quite a bit. And obviously, it isn't a certainty, but it definitely there's an illusion of it seeming like that.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and something we have heard a little bit of, and that uncertainty, particularly the fact that when I was younger, you were told, work hard and you'll do well. And everything was sort of laid out for you. You work hard, you do well at your exams, and you might go to university, and then you'll just keep progressing. And there was always the option of you get a house. There was always the option, a career could be there for you. Whereas it feels like that for this generation just isn't the case.
I feel like there's so much more awareness of that as well. I think, when I was 15 in year 10, I don't remember thinking too much about the wider economy, about the housing market. And maybe that was a luxury because it wasn't necessarily so much of an issue there. So it wasn't so much of a problem. As you said, Jodie, there was certainty around that. But also, I think I was probably just way too immature to even be thinking about that anyway.
I don't even think it's about maturity though. But if you're in a position where you can turn on a phone and the first thing you see is a news notification, like yesterday, right? Inflation up 3.5%. And next thing you do is you go onto your TikTok feed and you see a video of someone talking about it, and all these doomsday predictions, and then you go to school. And I'm not saying being aware of the world and the economy is a bad thing. Like I'm all for it. Like I'm a massive advocate for it. It's awareness of a bad thing, and there's still uncertainty.
Of course, yeah. And I have to turn the news off for periods of time because I get depressed by it.
Especially at the moment, yeah.
So trying to translate all that information when you haven't got the world experience through which to channel it as well would inevitably make you feel particularly depressed, because at least, I've had 46 years experience of living the world and seen bad things happen and being able to overcome them myself or see other people overcome. I have tools in my toolkit through which to translate that information that you won't have because you're 15, and that so it's like a blockage, I imagine, in your brain.
100%, definitely, yeah.
You've spoken about the fact that you got sucked in, for a better word, with the masculinity influencers and red pill culture, and then you sort of realised, hold on a minute, I don't like this. Some of it is sitting really uncomfortable with me. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of doing that, like being online, how that happened, what it was that you found attractive about it, and then eventually what it was that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back, that was like, okay, this is not something that I want to be part of anymore?
Okay, yeah. So my first exposure to it was probably when Andrew Tate, he's probably one of the most prominent figures. He was coming up to his peak, and it was in, I want to say 2022. So I'd have been 12, and it was at this point he was like the third most Googled man in the world. He was absolutely massive. You couldn't I don't think you could go onto TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat and start scrolling on reels or videos, and within 30 seconds, I don't think you would be able to get away with not seeing him pop up at least once. He was absolutely massive. He was everywhere. He was so prominent, and all of these social media companies, of course, at the time were raking it in because they had millions upon millions of people, watching these videos, and they were controversial, right? Controversy sells, controversy gets clicks, and I think a lot of the initial attraction and how he built his following initially, well, I think it's a pattern you see quite a lot in right-wing populism and just populism in general, is you have a figure and they start saying things that slightly edgy, slightly pushing the boundary, but they're still things that people secretly agree with, and they're things I guess you'd describe as people agree with but don't want to like say out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And he very boldly went out and said all of these things, and then you get this mentality of, oh, this guy's great, he's not scared. He doesn't care what people think. He just says, he just speaks. And, that is a respectful quality. That is a quality to be respected. Someone that goes out and speaks their mind, without being fearful of some institution or, of the rules or society. But then once you have that, once you've got that initial following of people that were attracted to you because of that reason, you can start edging more and more into an ideology, into more extreme opinions. And I think you saw this especially in the misogyny side. And then I think this works for, anyone following a populist figure like this, but especially for young men following Andrew Tate, not having the complex rationale of, being able to think you can agree with people on some things, but disagree on some other things. It's a mentality of when you start saying these extreme things, that, okay, he was right in the past and I agree with him in the past, but so that means I have to agree with him now, surely. And that he did that so well, which is why I will always say Andrew Tate is incredibly intelligent, incredibly calculated. He's still an awful person, don't get me wrong, but he is incredibly intelligent, and he knew exactly what he was doing from the start. And him sitting in a Romanian prison cell, I don't think he cared. I think he was, laughing all the way to the bank, really. He's made absolutely so much.
Yeah.
And he has built a lot of power off it. So yeah, so that's part of the attraction of it. So it's the bold statements, but it's also the imagery, and it's not just him. It's the whole Samantha as a whole, because a lot of this is being consumed in short form content. So we're talking Instagram, TikTok, short a-minute videos, right? And it's the imagery of clips of men with six packs and massive abs on a yacht in Dubai somewhere with 10 supermodels and bikinis around them, and they drive up in a Lambo. They've got stacks of cash they're putting into money counter machines. They're going shaking hands with people, getting photos. All of these clips are highly edited, like colourful, saturated, put over this really exciting, loud music. It's designed to be attractive. And you ask any 3-4-year-old boy, what do you want to be when you're older? And they'll probably tell you they want to be a superhero, right? Or something like that. They look like superheroes. They have that life. They live like Batman. At least the way they portray, they look like Batman. They have anything you'd ever dream of. They have that financial freedom. So you compare that imagery to the imagery they're getting in the mainstream media of a world of uncertainty. Which one are you going to listen to? You're obviously going to listen to the certain one. So I guess, that's a lot of the attraction of it, is all of that surface level imagery, but also having control and having certainty, and the way they manipulate statements and they manipulate their following over time to build their following in such a calculated and precise and intelligent and cold and sly way. And it's not just him, obviously, but Andrew Tate in particular did it so well.
And Josh, what age did you get a phone at? And when you got that mobile phone, was it because you were asking for it? Was it pressure because your friends had a phone? And would you have, now looking back, still had a phone at such a young age?
It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one in hindsight to think about. I got my first phone when I was 11. at that point, everyone was getting a phone. I wasn't even in year 7, I was in year 6, right, in primary school. It was late primary school. Everyone at that point was getting a phone. But I think the interesting thing is I don't think it is just, the phone is used as the center point of the technology behind all of this, right? But think about that before the age of 11, 12, when children are getting these phones. Before that, they're getting iPads, they're getting tablets, they're getting, computers. The same content's on there. It's just not in their pocket, and it's still just as easy to access. Unfortunately, because of the world we live in now and how technology is so interconnected and intertwined into our society, I don't think you can get away with not giving a child of a certain age a phone, because unfortunately it comes with such a level of social isolation there that it's unavoidable. I think with that, I think as a society, we need to admit we're not going to be able to keep children away from this harmful content. And, it's really unfortunate. It's really sad to admit. And I hate to say it, but we've got to do what we can do. And what I think we can do is to have open, honest conversations and two-way conversations, not lectures. I think that's important. The child needs to feel like they can speak to two-way conversations about, the content they might encounter, listening to their point of view as well. I think a lot of the problems with the manosphere, at least the surface level ones, could be solved by young men feeling when they talk about this and when they talk about their worries and their ambitions and why they're attracted to this content, they're not immediately met with, you're a misogynist, or this is wrong, this is immoral. Actually trying to listen to the surface level there and trying to understand them, and that's understanding. And until we offer a proper alternative to these figures online that are positioning themselves in a way that young men think, he understands me, he came from my background, he knows my desires, he knows my worries, he's speaking to me, and he's giving it all away for completely free online and free videos. They become almost like big brothers, like older brothers to you. And if there's not an alternative to that, if they're not experiencing that in the real world, but in the positive way outside of the manosphere, they'll just look for that further inside of the manosphere.
Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Koru Kids.
When my kids were younger, I never considered getting a nanny. It just seemed like something posh people do, something completely out of reach. Certainly for me, but times have really changed. And with nurseries, childminders and wraparound care, costs can really mount. And just imagine the peace of mind of having one person who your kids love, who you can rely on implicitly to look after your child in your home, someone who can handle school pickups, help with homework, sort dinner, and help the kids wind down. So you can finish your work guilt-free and come home to peace and serenity and be totally present with your kids. If I was to have another baby, which, I definitely won't be because I bought a dog instead, I would be considering nannies as an option. The flexibility, the simplicity, having one person you can fully trust.
I hear you. Shout out to the dog parents, me included. I need that in my life now. Koru Kids has full and part-time nannies that can work when your family actually needs them. Their nannies are vetted and trained, and they work all across the UK, so they will be where you are at. So why not have a look at their website, korukids.co.uk. It is free to search, and you can see what the cost difference is and whether it's a good fit for you. korukids.co.uk, that's KORU kids.co.uk.
What do you think about what Australia has done? They've banned social media for under 16s. Do you think the cat's out of the bag now? It's too late. We can't. Putting in legislation and laws is putting the cart before the horse, or whatever that saying is. I always get sayings wrong. I say them the wrong way around. Do you think that could work, or do you think no, there's no point?
The first thing I'd say is I completely understand where they're coming from. Like, their sentiment's right, and I think it's great that they're trying to protect their children as a nation and as a government. I think it was a strong move and it was a good move, but I think unfortunately it might have been a naive one. Like we said before, it's become so interconnected in society and so intertwined that yes, you would solve a lot of the problems of the manosphere if you just took the social media away in the first place, but you'd also create additional problems of social isolation. And because if you had something around and you've grown accustomed to it, and you've grown accustomed to a life with it in it, when that's withdrawn, people are going to struggle. Teenagers are going to struggle. So I think, that could be quite pessimistic, like, oh yeah, you can't do anything, just sit there and watch it burn. What I think governments and big institutions should be focusing on is actually, instead of letting these social media companies get away with their profit snatching activity of allowing manosphere and harmful content and these things to be dangled in front of teenagers purely for their own financial gain, by coming in with regulations and say, you need to put proper identification in place and you need to put proper systems and regulations in place. Otherwise, we're going to heavily sanction you. We're going to ban your platforms in our countries, and actually stand tall and actually start taking action against these companies and not allowing them to get away with this. Then I think that is an action that you could take. But I think a ridiculous part of it is, if I said to you now, would it be okay if there was a pub? But this sounds ridiculous, but would it be okay if there was a pub that you'd walk in and no matter someone's age, the barman would turn to them and say, "Are you 18?" And if they said yes, he'd hand them a pint. Obviously, that's completely wrong, right? You need some form of ID there. Otherwise, you get 11 or 12-year-olds walking and say, "Oh, yeah, I'm 18." And we recognise that, and we see that's completely, illogical, wrong. But then you frame it, and then you look into it, and there are pornography companies doing that exact system to verify the ages of their users.
I think that's part of the online safety bill, that they're asking for verification, proper verification. But so you do think it could work, banning, saying that you can only access these platforms if you're 16 or over, but only if there were proper verification methods put in place?
Yeah, obviously, just dodging around the regulations is probably part of it. And I don't think it's ever going to be properly enforceable. But I think the action, just to clarify, I think the action of taking social media away from under-16s is naive. And I don't think it is effective. I think the better action there is to go to instead of going to the user, going to the, the source, the platform, and saying, look, if you can't ensure properly that you're going to start, actually caring about safeguarding of your young users who you have a legal responsibility over, rather than your billions of pounds of profit lining your pockets and your shareholders' pockets every month. When you start caring more about that, then it'll be okay. If not, we're just going to take your platform away.
We interviewed James and Conrad, who had done the Channel 4 Gen Z report, looking at what is going on with your generation and some of the data around that. And they were talking about how they felt Ofsted should play a bigger role, because broadcasters, when they're on the TV or when they're on the radio, are held to very specific standards, and they can't just espouse and talk absolute nonsense on the radio or the TV. It's not allowed. And yet, then you go on the internet and that's completely fine. And so why is that? Because they are a broadcaster, they're a broadcasting platform. Do you think, so it sounds to me like you're sort of on the same page there, that you're saying that these platforms are broadcasters and they should be held to a much higher standard about what they enable children to see.
Yeah, of course. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say it'd be easy for them to do. Obviously, it'd be challenging, but come on, guys, put some good minds to it. I mean, yeah, it's not easy, but it's so critical and it's so vital that I think to allow these platforms to go forward is, governments need to stand tall and need to stand on their own 2 feet and think, right, okay, you need to do this, and be really firm with it and not be able to be pushed around by it, not be feeble, just be really strong and firm in that mentality of, okay, yeah, we're not going to allow you to continue until you start making changes.
Last week I was at the launch of Richard Reeves. You may have heard of him. He's got a book of Boys and Men.
Yeah, I saw that.
And he was launching a new research body over here in the UK. And he was talking about the fact that, similar to what you've said, we've been looking at this issue from the lens of the harm boys may be causing, rather than the trouble that boys are in.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that obviously this manosphere content is harmful. What would you say is the harm that is having like on you when you were immersed in this content? What harm was it causing to you? How was it affecting your emotional state, your feelings, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we've got the surface level harm that we're talking about already as a society, which is the view and attitude towards women and girls. That's not just harmful to women and girls, by the way. I'm not saying that. It's definitely very harmful to the men and boys as well, right? Because I think there's a lot of framing. Well, the whole manosphere and dating culture frames relationships is transactional, and that is so concerning, right? Seeing, you know, romantic partners is not people to build genuine connections with and lifelong bonds. Not that, but transactional. You buy her dinner, you give her money, and she sleeps with you. And unfortunately, I think that's how it's being framed. And also, there's another side there. Is I'm not sure if you've heard of the 80-20 rule, but it's an idea commonly propagated in these communities. It's that 80% of women are attracted to the top 20% of men.
Mm.
There was a song trending on TikTok quite recently, and the song was "I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes." And someone looked into it. That's like 0.00, like something ridiculous of the population. And it's a ridiculously hard standard to try and stick to, but it's the standard that's being propagated to all of the young men who are consuming that content, not just, and also the girls, right? So the girls are getting that unrealistic standard, and they're starting using that unrealistic standard, and not to their own fault, but I think the generation of girls, counterparting to that generation of boys, is becoming superficial, and obviously the boys are becoming superficial too. So as a generation, superficial standards are starting to be used as the standard for dating, and there's not an attitude anymore. And I think it's a wider problem in this generation. So that's one harm.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy the other day, and he's in his 30s. It's an older guy, and he was talking about the fact that he felt a
Can
single
we
guy.
not call people in the 30s older guys, please? Just tone that bit
Young
down.
men
Thank you, young
in his
man.
30s, young man, youthful guy. And he was saying that he feels like he needs to get to a certain level before he approaches women. Like he needs to earn a certain amount of money, have his own house, etc. And I was like, mate, like, look, just be funny, like have some charisma, and you'll. But he was like adamant, no, you're older. I'm 42. He was like, you don't know, like in my generation, this is the reality. Do you feel like that is amongst you and your friendship groups? That's like people feel like they need to reach a certain level before even speaking to a girl.
100%. Unfortunately, it's been so instilled in these communities, because if they said the reality was, oh yeah, just be yourself, be nice, be funny, be charismatic, they wouldn't make money on courses trying to sell you how to be, strong and rich. Because, I don't think, obviously they sell ideals of being rich and being in good shape, but I think the deeper level there is about being validated and being loved, and having a strong relationship. And I think that's quite a big part of it. So that's used so much on social media, because if they started saying, you don't actually need these things to be in a loving, healthy relationship, then they stop listening, because I think it's such a big care point for their audience.
Do you think that the vast majority of boys are watching this stuff? Do you think it's just like pretty much every boy is engaging in this sort of content?
At least aware. I don't think you'd meet a teenage boy who doesn't know who Andrew Tate is.
Yeah, no, I remember the early days of Andrew Tate, and being with a friend of mine who at the time had a teenage son, and we were talking about Andrew Tate, and he said, I bet my son will have no idea who he is. No, he wouldn't know who he is. And I shouted over to him, I won't say his name, obviously, but I was like, do you know who Andrew Tate is? And immediately was like, yeah, of course I do. And my friend looked at me like horrified, absolutely horrified. And then the kid said to me something really shocking. He was like, Andrew Tate didn't do that awful thing to that woman that it said he did. It's just made up, and people are making it up to take him down. And then I looked at my friend as if to say, you might want to be having some conversation. But we were both so surprised at how prevalent it was.
Yeah, like, okay, first, of course, innocent until proven guilty, right? But at the same time, even I found myself doing this when I was engrossed in it. There was a position where you've got young men so engrossed and such a cult following that they're trying to find ways of, oh no, this, this role model figure in my life, I need this. And it's not I need him here, to guide me, and I need this to not be true. So, and obviously he sells that it's the Matrix, like, the institution's trying to pin this to him and take him down because he's, like, speaking the truth, and they're scared. Obviously, complete BS, right? But because he's built up that massive following, they take every word that comes out of his mouth as gospel. So, they start listening to that and they start justifying a sexual abuser.
What can parents do, Josh? What would you say to me? Talk me through it, because I am right on the cusp of this. My 11-year-old will go to secondary school in September. He's desperate for a phone. I haven't given him one yet. And I know that my options are I either give him something I think is harmful, or I socially ostracize him from his social group. I don't know what to do here. And I am constantly trying to drip feed messages of try and not look at things in their binaries. Stuff is more complicated than you first think it is. You are a brilliant human being. You just need to remember that, and that there are more important things in the world than money and strength, and your body is brilliant just the way it is. It doesn't need to be buffed up. All of that stuff I'm already trying to drip feed him, but I still feel entirely out of my depth and like it's David versus Goliath. And I can see him getting sucked into this stuff because I know what he's like. So help, Josh. Solve it for me.
I'm sorry to be pessimistic here, but I don't think there's an easy answer, because if there was an easy solution for parents, it'd have been done 3 years ago, and Andrew Tate would have disappeared. But he didn't.
Yeah.
I think it's more about open and honest communication and conversations. Going into a conversation trying to talk about this with when your child comes to you and tells you, "Oh, I want to be strong, I want to be rich," and saying, no, this isn't how you should be thinking. The content you're consuming is misogynistic, it's wrong, it's morally wrong, because of the way it's framed, like we spoke about before, that's just not going to be effective. So it's got to be sensitive and it's got to be understanding. I think parents need to frame themselves as genuinely wanting to know and care and understand about how they're thinking, and getting to a deeper level. Okay, you want to be strong and rich. Why is that? And, taking down to a surface level, is it because of this content online? Is it because of, deeper, urges to be seen and validated, or, having control and power? And another thing I would say is I don't think the actual ambitions the red pill and self-improvement community sells are bad. Like, I myself, I'm trying to build wealth. I'm trying to get stronger. I'm trying to make money, of course. I think they're good things. And there are definitely good areas online where the same ideals and the same goals are being propagated, but in a good way. I think the first example I give that instantly springs to mind is Simon Squibb, right? He is an absolute legend. He's amazing. He's the what's your dream guy on TikTok. And he goes around and he asks young people what their dream is, and he gives them money to start their own businesses. And, there's no misogyny there. There's no harmful content there. It is literally just a man going around for completely free, because he doesn't sell any courses or anything, going around for completely free, trying to give advice and trying to healthily channel that same ambition. Because young men are never going to not want to be rich, right? Young men are never not going to want to be strong and ripped. I mean, there's a reason every action figure 40 years ago had massive biceps, right? Because those underlying ambitions are still there. So I think it's about alternatives, and as a society we need to build alternatives. You're not going to stop trying to take the ambition out of these young men and instill it into something else. Instill it into positive fitness areas, positive business areas like Simon Squibb. So we need to build alternatives, and I think that's the way forward.
Would you, if your child is watching this stuff but isn't talking to you about it, they're just staying quiet, but you know that they're absorbing these messages and they're listening to masculinity influencers that are giving them bad advice and views of the world. Again, I know, obviously not being judgmental, but would you say to parents, you really should be talking to them about it? And is there sort of, how would you do that, do you think? How would you have that conversation? Should we invite you over to have a chat with them?
Josh, you start this could be a business. You start charging parents for advice.
What, like consultancy? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, parents definitely should be involved. And as long as, I don't think if you have the mindset of genuinely wanting to understand your child, you can't go wrong, right? If you're going in with it purely with the intention, like with the actual intention of not trying to tell them off or trying to drag them out of it, but trying to understand them, you will not go wrong. So I guess that's the slightly more optimistic view. But also, like, worrying statistic, working class boys in the UK now are more likely to own a mobile phone than grow up with their dad in the home. There is a role model crisis. There's a massive role model crisis. And you've got to remember, all of these influencers that are speaking to these young men online, they're barely 10 years older than they are. They're young. They're in their 20s and their 30s. They're in that same demographic. And unfortunately, they're your parents, right? So you want your child to look up to you and respect you, of course. But there is a certain element of where, these role models need to come from, I hate to say it, a male background, number one, but from a similar age and demographic.
Do you think they do? I'm really interested in that. Do you really think they do? Do you think, because I speak to a lot of single mums with boys who are crapping themselves and over all of this, and they don't know what they feel out of it. They feel that they've been told that they won't have the same influence as a man will, and they're like, but I'm a single mum and I don't know what to do. Do you really think that it has to be a man talking about that stuff because it's a man that's giving them the other message, if you see what I mean?
I think young men will always look for male role models, right? Because if you take masculinity, so it's a big thing, right? How do you learn to be a man? What does it mean to be a man? Young men are trying to find that in their environment. And I'm not saying it has to be a dad, right? Like, I'm very lucky to have grown up with an amazing dad, right? But, sports coaches, more male teachers, other male figures of authority in these boys' lives, to speak to them as an alternative to these, influences. So, because young men are always going to look to men to find ideas about how to be masculine, healthily masculine. Because I think at the moment, the way male role models is being set up, like, I cannot remember the last time I heard the word masculinity online without the word toxic attached to it. So there's not healthy conversations about what it means to be a man. And obviously, a lot of what the red pill culture is pushing is completely and utterly wrong. But that's only going to be realized, and that's only even going to matter when there is an alternative and a healthy, active dialogue from older men to younger boys about what does it mean to be a man. These lessons, these values that are being instilled. And I'm not saying that has to come from a parent, but I think it still needs to come from somewhere, even just from the media, right? Not necessarily just from, people in their lives, like actual people.
Yeah. One last question. Do you think then schools and teachers need training and help in how to deal with this? And if so, what sort of, firstly, we've heard from the government that they're thinking about playing adolescents in schools, which I think most people now are agreeing that that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah. Putting a video on a screen at the front of a classroom is not going to fix anything for one. Like, Adolescence was great. It was a great TV show. And it built some awareness, right? But that's how I see it. It was a great TV show. I don't think it was really well made, and I'm glad it built some awareness around the issue. But I think the emphasis was in the wrong place. And that's not the fault of the show, right? I think you just got to see it as it is, not as a symbol and a lesson and an actual, tool that can be used to drag young men out of this. Because, at the end of the day, it was focused on the tragic story of that guy's murder. Right. If anything, it created fear, not answers.
Yeah, perfectly put.
It's very difficult, because we spoke about this before. Members of the so-called institutions that these influences warn against and say are the enemy, they have to be very careful, because if they go about it in the wrong way, they'll just polarize these young men even further into the red pill side. So if you take the approach of trying to instantly go in and talk about, these influences, they're really misogynistic and, they're really moral and wrong and you shouldn't be listening to them. It's almost like you're taking away, those positive emotions that they're feeling, that certainty, that control of their lives, their ambitions, which to a young man are probably like, one of the most like closest and valued things to them, right? So if we're allowing it to be manipulated, that's what I think the most immoral part of the manosphere is. Obviously, there's misogyny and there's attitudes towards women, but I think the most immoral part about the manosphere and the red pill culture is these intrinsic values of young men and their most valuable assets being completely manipulated. But going back to the schools thing, because of the appeal of the influences to these values, then trying to strip away the content with the idea of this is wrong and these influences are bad, they're wrong. So you're putting that in front of them and thinking, okay, well, you're taking away the control I had in my life, you're taking away the certainty, you're taking away my ambition.
And not giving you anything else to replace it.
It's
Just
about alternatives.
There you go, that's gone.
Yeah, it is about alternatives. And I think, that's why there's a lot of positive action going on around at the moment, but there's definitely so much space for it to be propelled forward. And I think we need positive alternatives in society where I think we look critically at the manosphere and think, okay, what are the good parts of it? What are the good things this is doing for young men? Because at the end of the day, putting all the bad things aside, the manosphere is still getting young men to start their own businesses and care about their fitness and, care about their appearance and things like that, which are good things. But you just take those good things and you put it into a healthy alternative without all the harmful rhetoric. And then there you have a really viable solution. But I think that's a role of wider institutions such as governments to implement that. I think, unfortunately, on a personal community scale, I don't think you can really achieve that without wide-scale government intervention.
It needs government funding, doesn't it? I wouldn't want the government to try and do something like that because can you imagine? I mean, the government try and do anything interesting or cultural and it always falls flat on its face. But they should be funding stuff like that in order to have a different narrative.
100%.
Josh, thank you. This has been so insightful, and honestly, I find you utterly fascinating, and you're so clever and so thoughtful and so inspiring, to 46-year-old old bag me and to kids. And I am so excited about this book coming out, and I really hope that you get lots of platforms to be able to talk about your thoughts on this because it's really important.
Yeah, seriously, Josh, when you're ready to run for Prime Minister, then I'll be voting for you. Seriously, you've blown me away with your words and the way you deliver your messages. And when the book comes out and it's in the shops, we'd love to have you back on because I think what you've got to say is incredible, and your voice is very much needed in this conversation. 100%.
That's really kind. Thank you.
Thank you.